Now we have our first panel of the day, as mentioned before by the team. The first panel is going to be about gender equality. And before I'm going to be joined by the different panelists that are joining us for this event, just let's give a bit of an overview of what is gender equality. So first of all is the SDG number 5 that the United Nations put as one of the most groundbreaking, but of course like meaningful challenges that we see out there for society and for the world. Gender equality is required for a peaceful and sustainable world. And what is gender equality and women's empowerment all about? Is a push, is a need to provide women and girls with access to educations, skills, and training facilities, as much as public health and employment to reach gender equality. Our Gender Equality SDG session will explore specifically women in innovation and technology. What are the challenges and the pathways, and what impact does the increase of women entrepreneurs have on the economy? And of course, this panel is co-led with a Financial Times expert that I'm going to introduce you in a minute. So it's really important in this panel that we're going to go through financial inclusion for women as one of the key points. And how is a financial inclusion for women different in certain cases from financial inclusion for both genders? And what is the impact of achieving financial inclusion? And before that, financial education for women and girls, and what does it mean for society? So let me welcome on stage my the speakers of this panel. So I see connected here Sylvia Panavoni, Astrid de Valon, and Romulo Navarrete. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to give you a brief introduction of the three speakers that are joining for this first panel. Sylvia Panavoni is the economics editor of The Banker, a magazine of the Financial Times Group, and a columnist on sustainable finance and environmental, social, and governance risks. She's also an honorary fellow at City University of London and is part of the London Council of not-for-profit organization WIL, Women in Leadership in Latin America. Thank you so much, Sylvia, for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And then I see Astrid de Valon, that is coordinating the WFP initiative on digital financial inclusion and women economic empowerment. Astrid is passionate about putting more money into more women's hands. So you are definitely in the right place, on the right panel, and with the right people there. She started her career in the private sector with the Boston Consulting Group and spent over 18 years in Africa and at global level in management and advisory positions with UN agencies, international NGOs, the European Union, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Thank you so much, Astrid, for being with us today.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Romulo Navarrete joining us. He is the head of partnerships for the SDGs at the Seedstars. He is originally from Peru, and Romulo launched the Seedstars Latin America tour in 2016, looking for the most promising entrepreneurs in the region and organizing the Seedstars World Competition that connected the startups with investors, mentors, and the public-private sector. He's also heading the diversity and inclusion efforts of Seedstars. Thank you so much, Romulo, for being here. Hi. Hi, everyone. So let's start with our panel today. So the first question we would like to ask you guys is definitely, and I'll start with Sylvia, in terms of like, I gave a bit of a general, definition of gender equality, but the experts like you, with your focus, of course, on financial inclusion, of course, can give us maybe a bit of a better angle when it comes to what shall we be prioritizing when we are talking about the gender equality. Over to you.
Of course, thank you, Virginia, and it is a pleasure to be here. So thank you for the introduction. And I should also add that I'm also editing a new platform that we hope will develop into a fully fledged product about sustainable finance. So you mentioned that I'm part of Will, which is a not-for-profit, which has now grown really into this massive network of women trying to support other women. I'm Italian, and I also contribute to an initiative by an Italian newspaper called Il Sole 24 Ore. The initiative is all around gender and gender equity. And so it's certainly gender is something that, and diversity and inclusion is something that is very much a core professional interest, but also a personal interest of mine. So again, it's a pleasure to be here. Now, when it comes to financial inclusion, we have all seen the numbers. Globally, just not looking at the situation for women, but there still are, and this is according to the latest figures. New figures are going to come up very soon, but according to the latest figures, 1.7 billion adults are outside of the financial services network, which is obviously not just negative from an economic point of view, but also from, you know, a personal, we can even stretch it to a human rights point of view, because these people then see, by being excluded from the financial services space, see really curtailed their ability to grow. Then within the group, we also see, and by we I mean the organizations that have also gone out and crunched the numbers, they have seen that women tend to suffer this exclusion disproportionately, but there are also very particular differences within countries. So I'm thinking, for example, at numbers put together by the UN Secretary General Special Advocate for Financial Inclusion, which is Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, and her staff has gone out and done amazing work actually when it comes to financial inclusion generally. But when it comes to women, for example, they noticed that in the Philippines, the situation is actually skewed in favor of women when it comes to access to financial services. But in other countries like Pakistan, for example, the situation is very much different. And so according again to the latest 2019 figures, you have 35% of men who have access to bank accounts compared to only 7% of women. So this is clearly something that has a toll on the economy, but also more broadly on society. And we also see a repercussion on this, there is still a presence of this even in developed countries, actually, because we have all seen the stories about now that financial services are very much digitized, and this trend will only continue to grow. We have seen, for example, bias against a certain gender or a certain category. And so that adds yet another layer of complexity to something that could, in theory, help improve the situation, so digitalization. But we also need to look at how these solutions are put together. So you really need to look at having gender balance, both on the receiving ends of these solutions, but also on the other side. So on the side of the people actually putting together these solutions. So you do want to focus on gender equity and gender balance on both sides. So of course I can keep on talking, but I don't want to take up too much time from the other two speakers. But these are just, to introduce the subject and my personal view on this. These are the key points I would like to bring to the table.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. And Astrid, based on your experience and as well, of course, your years in living in Africa, I think you can bring a very peculiar perspective on this. And definitely there is also a journey that you have been exploring. So I will leave it to you to really walk us through your perspective on this.
Thank you so much. Yes, when after all this year living in countries that WFP is supporting, we have seen that the cash transfer that we are providing in terms of physical cash could be much more useful if we would provide it on a bank account owned by a woman. Why is it important? Because women have a lot of hurdles to climb when they want to reach financial inclusion. The first one is for them to receive an income, a source of income. And it can be either that they access a job opportunity, but also they receive remittances or they receive money from government. And we've seen in the COVID-19 time that a lot of governments have started to send out money to their citizens or the refugee that they host using digital means. And the other hurdle that women have is the access to ID. And that's a big one because in the world there are 1 billion people without ID. And without an ID, you cannot open a bank account and you cannot even open a mobile money account. So 600 million, are women who don't have this ID. So disproportionate gap. And there are also more difficulties that women face to feel that they trust how to use a mobile phone, how to use a bank account, how to use digital means. So there is a lot of confidence to be built to increase women's capacity and capability to feel they trust how to use an account. And another hurdle that women would have on their way to digital financial inclusion is customer protection, because many of these women who are receiving, for instance, entitlements from their governments, it's the first time for them that they are exchanging with, for instance, a mobile money operator. So the agent can come and say, actually, if you want your money, I might charge you a little bit more. And the women don't know where to complain. And if they can complain, they feel maybe if they complain, their entitlement will be removed. So it's very important to ensure that there is a good customer protection around the services, so that the more vulnerable people who are the first one who are accessing for the first time these services feel protected. And another hurdle that we saw in our work is also the fact that there are not many private sector providers, and that's where the fintech community is so important there, who design products that are adapted to women's need, especially for the women who are first-time clients and living in the most vulnerable categories of population. But we really want to say that they have a lot of potential, and it's not only a question of corporate social responsibility. It's really a question of seeing that if you develop a product that this woman will trust, they will adopt this product, they will be very loyal to it, and they will even recommend it to other people in their community. So there is really a business case to raise, which will be a win-win situation, women being able to access loans, insurance, credits, etc. And that's why it's very important that it's digital, so that they have a credit history, which is very important to access other products. And trust is essential there. And we also need to understand that when women are receiving, let's say in a remote village on their mobile account, so if we reach this point where they're receiving their cash on their mobile account, but there is no shop around them that accept mobile money, they need to cash out, then we're losing a lot of the opportunity there. So we really think we need to insist on building digital economy, and that, of course, with all the stakeholders that are there. So it's not only the role of course, a humanitarian agency, but mostly of the private sector, of government, of central banks, telecom, etc., to ensure that women have these opportunities. Because just to say one statistic that I find quite shocking, on part, beside all the disparity that exists, for instance, in mobile money ownership, in bank account ownership, there are still 88% of the country of the world who have a legal blockage for women to be economically empowered. So there is a legal block somewhere in their legislation preventing women to be economic actors. 88% of the country of the world. So we are really far from gender equality there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Astrid. And I think your point that you're raising here about, a legal situation, but there is not much that, even like private organizations and NGOs can do about singularly, but of course, as a community and as a group, maybe there is something there that even out of this form of challenges and events and debates, there is a kind of an awareness that we can bring to these situations all over the world. And I think it's really meaningful that you touched on the digital economy point, that there are a lot of innovation that we can think of, we can try to create, and the founders, can of course try with their teams to tackle the gender equality issues. But there are some infrastructural issues and problems that of course we need to mention and of course be conscious about. So there is a bit more of an overall activity that needs to be done when it comes to gender equality. It's not just about the women, it's not just about the girls, it's really a point in terms of like the SDG that has a huge complexity. And also I would love with Romulo maybe to go through some of the innovations that maybe you have been seeing thanks to your experience in this space, that maybe can help us think about how we can tackle these challenges and infrastructural challenges. What you have seen that has been really mesmerizing for you?
Absolutely, it will be a pleasure. Thank you, Virginia, for the question. Actually, I could think right now of a startup that is called Oran. They are from Pakistan, and it links with Astrid was mentioning, coming from the point that 49% of the population in Pakistan are women, but only 7% have access to a bank account. I was talking with the startup, and they mentioned that pretty much the financial services and the products are not catered for women. They don't speak the language that women do in terms of communication and marketing. So what I actually did was to analyze better what was going on in terms of cash flow and alternatives to financial services that women were doing in Pakistan. And they realized that community was very important for them. So they would be having loans, for example, between women friends. And that the intention of the savings or the money that they were asking for was pretty much for their household and education of the children. So we're seeing here that the destination or the purpose for money in this case was mainly for the families. That can be completely different for the purchases or the intention that men can have. So they cracked this, they understood this, and they created Oran, helping women have access to financial services. It's community-based, referral by other women. So somebody needs to actually give you the introduction to the circle, and then you're welcome. And so yeah, so that is one example that comes to my mind. That kind of, they understood specifically what were the needs in terms of communication, in terms of intention, purpose, and they created this startup. And another one that I can think of that can break somehow the infrastructure gaps that we have been mentioning is She Codes. I'm based in Portugal, and I met them recently, and they are helping more than 50,000 women around the world learning how to code. And the reason why I believe this is a particular interesting point is that many times women do not have access to higher education, hence a job. So it is a systematic issue from the very start, in many times in the teenage years, where because of machismo and other social pressure, they don't get to access higher education because they're mainly destined to be mothers. So that's like the main role that they have. So they don't have education, they don't have a good paying job, and they don't have access to the economy, etc., etc. So what they are doing at She Codes is that they are teaching women from emerging markets on how to code, thanks to the payment of women in non-emerging markets and can pay for a bootcamp. So they use 10% of these revenues to finance the education of women in emerging markets to learn how to code. So I think this is a great way we can see profit with purpose, and that we are really going deeper into the structure challenge.
Thank you so much, Romulo. And I think you really touched on a very interesting point and meaningful, that of course is, the correlation between inclusion and education, and how meaningful, of course, is to give access. So accessibility to education as one of the key points. And I think, Silvia, on this, that has been one of the key points of your discussion with the Queen Maxima of the Netherlands. So that is serving now as as UN General Secretary's Special Advocate for Inclusive Finance. So maybe you want to walk us through some of these key points about education and finance for women.
Absolutely, thank you, and thank you for referencing to that interview. As I said, with Queen Maxima, so the latest we did only a couple of months ago, and it was exactly on financial education. So clearly, this is not just an issue for women, but given the fact that, as Romulo rightly mentioned, education for women and girls is often limited, even before it comes to all the obstacles put in front of them to then independently access financial services. It's really hard, isn't it? So working first around even understanding what we mean by financial education, or rather financial health, all the components that go into defining how you are financially, and access to services, but of course even the level of stress that comes from not having enough income day to day to manage your life. So that's really important work. And there are actually some interesting private sector initiatives. I mean, Romulo mentioned a couple of really interesting ones, and I've been looking at banking for many years, and banks do realize, at least that's what they say, that including widening their base, the customer base, is good for business. Now, those are some actual obstacles, because given the way that banks traditionally have been accessing customer risk, low income potential customers they're difficult to get on board. They are costly, and so I think it is fair to say that they have been struggling. So it has often been left to technology firms, to fintechs, to smaller initiatives to kind of fill the gaps, and then maybe the bigger guys, the bigger banks then follow. But it is also a case of actually having partnerships across industries. And again, going back to the Queen Maxima's work at the UN, you also have, I'm a big fan, of course, but this is not just going to be about her work there, but it's also about bringing together data. So we go back to the digital aspect. So bringing together companies that have data. So Unilever and MasterCard, and they did partner to, again, share information about customers, so that one could provide that information that could create the basis to assess the level of creditworthiness of a potential customer, and then create products that would run based on that information. We mentioned, Astrid mentioned already, digital ID, another very, very important and potentially revolutionizing element of this issue of including more people and more women in financial services. We have stats from the World Bank that say that around 1 billion people around the world do not have any formal way of identification. And if you look at the poorest people in the world, so the lowest 40% percentile, among these, women are disproportionately affected more negatively by the lack of ID. So again, you find women struggling, whichever way you kind of dissect this issue. It is definitely important to focus on women. But again, there are some interesting movements. It still feels like there is a lot of space left by the big banking and financial services providers, the big incumbents. And so I guess for all of you watching, this is a good space for you to come in and fill the gap with fresh eyes, with again, a new mindset that is inclusive at the very outset. So not just in terms of the problems that you're trying to solve, but even from your own perspective, the way that you come at this problem, and the way, hopefully, that you can bring new solutions
Thank you so much,
to deal with this stubborn issue.
Yeah, no, thank you, because this is really the point of the challenge as well. Like actually, for the people that received the challenge this morning, as you could see, we really focused it on the fintech angle, and how meaningful is fintech and fintech innovations that even you guys can brought up thanks to this challenge to many other viewers and a large audience can be meaningful, even like, to have a little, give a bit of spin of a different perspective on the problem, and definitely the challenges that Sylvia was mentioning. And even like, for the ones of us that are connecting from other countries where the fintech is so much more developed, maybe there are a few innovations that we can integrate and implement in other markets. So Astrid, I would love to ask you about certain opportunities that maybe you have seen in this space, and in terms of like literally the financial education point. We went through Yasmin journey, and is literally, I think, in summing up very nicely what are all the different challenges but also opportunities that she can meet in her journey. Are there as well in this case, not just the one of Yasmin, of course, but other examples of maybe organizations from your perspective, maybe from the UN and NGOs that are really bringing new innovations, or at least more accessibility to women to financial services?
Yes, and that's amazing to see the proliferation of ideas and innovation by different fintech, and also startups working, for instance, on financial education. There are new ways, moving away from the standard classroom where somebody comes, sit, have a training, and then leave and say, yes, I've attended the training. We know that this doesn't work. It's not enough. We need concrete trial and error use of the phone, for instance, or to be able to apply practically the learning, and that's very important for adult learning. And there are so many women and men who are not very much from a written culture and prefer oral culture. So there is startup innovating, doing training with only audio, like radio sketches on financial literacy. So there is a great project carried out in Uganda and Ghana on that we want to collaborate for. And that's one way of using innovation for financial literacy. There are a lot of excitement, I would say. When I was recently in Uganda, in the Nakivale refugee camp, we were looking at groups of women, Village Saving and Loans Association of Women, and they used to save in their little box with 2 padlocks, writing down on paper who gets which money, etc. And they started having a mobile application developed for VSLA specifically. So they still would gather, because gathering is still a social act that is very important for women there to exchange their ideas. But they would be so proud to have actually all the tracking of the different transaction that was in their app. And they were the other groups were just asking not for more money, but they were just asking, when can we get the app too? So when you see this excitement, then the fact that women are then so proud, feeling empowered on this journey, because not only do they have more trust in each other, there is nobody who can steal the little box with the money, it's more safe, but they also get a profile that then they can go to the bank with and show what they've been able to save also as an individual, not only as a saving groups. So these are all very positive aspects. And I just wanted to come back to one point you raised about the importance of the overall environment and the regulation. Central banks are actually really approachable people to talk to. And we really, each time I'm heading to one country, meeting with the central bank, trying to say, these are, for instance, the different points that refugees are needing to access digital account. And in different countries, it leads to central banks changing their regulation to accept, for instance, tiered no UK customer requirements, so that refugee can access account, or maybe having smaller value accounts so that at least they can access the initial phase of transfer, hoping that the regulation will then change. In Uganda, we are trying to discuss with the central bank to lower the condition for a woman to become mobile money agents, because to become a mobile money agent, you need a lot of requirements and many women don't have access to this collateral, etc. And so we are trying to discuss and say to the central bank, it will have a lot of advantage if women could be mobile money agents. More women would come to them, be trained, feel more confident, and become economic actors. So you increase your domestic product at the end.
And I think thank you so much, Astrid. And I think your point is really touching on something that is really dear to us, even from a Financial Times perspective. One is the format, so accessibility to different formats, to even get more informed around finance, about global markets, and so on, is something that the FT teams are really working hard towards. And most of, for example, of the audio formats that we know that is listened more by women rather than men is for free on FT platforms and audio platforms. And I think this is a way, even for a subscription-based business and the newspaper as the Financial Times, even like to give accessibility to quality journalism and quality information to diverse audiences. So changing the formats, rethinking about how we are used to do things, but at the same time how we can make it more approachable in a certain way. And I think there is a bit of a scary feeling every time we are thinking about retirement, finance, money, and it's sometimes it's too hard for me to understand, and you kind of push aside the problem. I think as you are an individual, man or women, it doesn't really matter. But I think really rethinking about the formats is something that even as a overall world perspective is really interesting, and as well as the community point. And I think here it's like the gathering, the fact that you can have different individuals, in that case different women, that are collectively working towards this financial goal. I think it's really interesting. And I think there is a similar trend as well in you mentioned some examples, Astrid, from the African continent, but also in the Latin American continent. Romulo, I don't know if you have in this case maybe one examples where there is a community-based activity that you can let us explore, thanks to your experience with the CISA competition that you brought up to life in 2016.
Absolutely, yes. I can think of also a startup called Laboratoria that is pretty much teaching women on how to code. So it's similar to She Codes. The difference with them is that they're not only focus on the education aspects of the girls, of the young girls, but also on the employability, because once you know how to code or you have these skills, then the next step is onto accessing a job. And we've seen that jump from education and jobs can also be challenging. And I wanted to particularly drive the attention towards the minorities of the minorities, because this is exactly what we are tackling. We're here discussing about women in general, but it's true that women in vulnerable groups, for example, migrants, rural or low income, and from minority groups, so indigenous or African, it's much more challenging in that. So when we're talking about formats or ways of communicating or designing products, we should also include, for example, native languages. How do we reach these women? How do you access a computer in an area where you have stable electricity, connectivity? So it goes it goes much deeper, let's say, than just I would say the gender aspect of it. And I would dare to say that minority groups and vulnerable populations in women, it's much more challenging. So what Laboratory is doing, we are looking for women in vulnerable, let's say, environments, and also migrants. In Latin America, actually, we have, on average, much more migrants that are women than in the rest of the world. So according to the OECD report of 2020, in general, women in the world were 48%, but in Latin America, we're slightly more than this. 52% of all migrants are women. And then we have a lot of different challenges like identity, financial inclusion, education, jobs, and so on. So I think that it's important to replicate models like the one of Laboratories. Like, okay, we tackle the education challenge now, but now let's continue to the employability aspect. And it's very community-based, because then the women that are already working in certain companies that have been in place, they become mentors of the students that are just entering the program. And I think that in this aspect, because of social perception, to have role models is very important. So I really like this model laboratoria, like education, employability, and also the social component to it.
Thank you so much, Romulo. And I think, yes, of course, the correlation now between when you give access, when you give education, and you are upskilling people, what you are actually doing from, employability perspective is really key and really important. And this is one of the key points as well, I believe, of our two organizations. So both with the FT Talent team is really building a platform thanks to the challenge where employers can meet bright talent from all over the world, and especially from diverse backgrounds, thanks to, of course, the empowerment and the kind of education and training they can get from us and our services. And that's really similar to what you are doing with startups. So is incubating them, accelerating them, and giving them that extra upskilling effort, let's say, and tools that can really make them meaningful when they jump on the market. So I think this is what this event is all about, and it really ties up very nicely to what we are doing as well, in terms of like how we can tackle as organizations as well this SDG goal and all the others. So I would love now, for the remaining time, to go to the questions, because we are receiving so many from the audience. So maybe I would love to start with reading you the first one. And this is coming from the audience. Would you believe that there exist gender differences in business leadership? What would you believe are the main factors behind the misrepresentation of women in CEO positions? Approximately 5% of S&P 500 CEOs were female a few years ago. Sylvia, do you want to go for this one?
Sure. I mean, it's so complex. There are a couple of things that I think everyone is very much aware of. So initially, there wasn't the base, right? So women do enter the workforce, but then at some point there is that famous ceiling, and you can't crack it, and only a few get through. And there are a number of reasons for this that we've all looked into and heard from the experts. So the social role that we all place on women. So looking after children, looking after elderly parents, their responsibility still, I think it's fair to say, is falls on the shoulders of women. And we've seen that even during the pandemic, right? So we've seen that even in this country, in the UK, and in the developed world, that women end up leaving even the workforce, feeling they had to resign because it was just too much to bear, looking after children, or everyone else running the household, and at the same time having a full-time job. So there is that sort of social construct, but also we can't really run away from bias, whether it is explicit or implicit, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And some of the experts will tell you that it is very much conscious. And so the way that leadership, the very notion of leadership is thought of. So you need to be, assertive, a deep voice. There are so many ways that are associated to a more masculine representation of leadership. And until now, really, women were left with trying to mimic that kind of behavior or way of presenting yourself, or for example, rather than having a more consultative approach, having a more very much top-down approach. I take the decision, everyone else follows. And so it's a combination of these factors, but it is also a combination of the environment around you. So whether, again, we go back to childbearing, whether you have a strong parental leave, and whether that parental leave is allowed not just for women, but also for men. And we also need to talk about the role that society has created for men, because you may have a lot of men who actually would like to spend time looking after children, or even, having a more, taking a bigger sort of domestic role, but maybe they feel they cannot because they would be judged even more negatively if they do take their parental leave and a long parental leave. So it's a combination of factors. I think that things are improving because the world's mentality, we all trying to do better. but there are also certain stubborn issues that is very difficult to change. I mean, I don't know anyone who says that, you know, they went to a diversity training and actually things changed. It's very, I think I find it more useful when things are put in place, like actual metrics are put in place, parameters, bonuses. So the CEO of a British bank, she would tell you that she sends back any suggestion of bonuses when she notices that there is a big discrepancy between the bonus, the pot allocated to men and the one allocated to women. So when you have the right structure, both within society, so public sector, so government allowances, but also within organizations, and when you have the right leadership, then things begin to change. But those, I would say, are the big stubborn issues.
Thank you very much. And thanks, Sylvia, for touching on the concept of care that I think we kind of, didn't touch upon before, but the importance of unpaid domestic work, and how, of course, this is not just gender equality is not just a women's issue, but is boys and girls and any other genres issue, is something that collectively as society and with all the diverse genres that we can represent, we need to think of and tackle. So I have another question from James, which is asking, what is the best approach to promote women leadership in many parliaments in Africa if women, who are also majority of the voters, do not vote in women to hold these national seats? Astrid, do you have a perspective on this? Not an easy one.
Not an easy one. I mean, I might want to take it back to the social norm barriers that we can feel actually in the work that we do on digital financial inclusion, because we can see how difficult it is sometimes for women. And when I came back from Jordan, it was very clear in the refugee camps where the Syrian refugees are living. You can listen to women describing their day and listen to men describing their day, and it's so different. And women have to, for instance, ask for authorization each time they have to go out from the house. They don't have a mobile phone, or when they have one, it's the one that is used, for instance, by the kids during COVID to access their lessons online because the school was not there anymore. So basically, they don't have the same types of freedom. And I think these social norms, to work towards changing them, it takes a long time, and it needs to be done in coordination with the men. And that's very important to understand how in community, and I suppose that might be a bit the answer to the more political question that you ask, but working with the men to make men understand that if the woman has access to this, for instance, economic empowerment, it's not only for her, it's for the whole household. And that will bring the whole household in a better position. The same for education, the same for the civic rights. I think that is very important, and that's what we're trying to do in the work that we're doing. We are saying we are focusing on women because we see there is this big gap between women and men in different aspects that we quoted before. However, whatever we will do that all together with the different stakeholders that will help women, it will also help men, because if it's easier for a woman to operate their app, it will be even easier for men. So it's not focusing on women to exclude the men. And I just want to advise the people online who have not read The Moment of Lift from Melinda Gates. I mean, we are supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to do this work, but this book is really amazing because it describes so well how we can focus on women, and how, for instance, if a woman unpaid care would be paid, how much a contribution to a country economy this would be. And I think it focused very much on women, but without excluding the men. To the contrary, appreciating the different roles and the complementarity of role. So the moment of lift, I advise a good read. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Astrid. And on this point, I would have a question for Romulo that is coming from our audience. So from Namande, we have this question that I think is very interesting. And how can men be encouraged to support women in communities? So what is the kind of, what's your thinking around that? I think it's an interesting question because he's framing it around the encouragement and push for men to build support.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I believe the first step is to educate ourselves. We need to acknowledge that this is a challenge, and like it has been said multiple times in this panel, it's for the benefit of everybody. It's not progress of women and taking the man behind, but it's actually for the entire society. So I think the first thing is to read more about gender equality, to understand what are the figures and the key statistics in our country or in our industry. And once we do that, I think that will trigger so many different thoughts and ideas that we can do. It starts for promoting a diversity and inclusion workshop in our own company. It's having the little gestures, like if you see that if we are in a meeting room full of men and there's few women in the meeting room, we can start by saying, what do you think? And trying to promote the participation of it. Trying to challenge our biases in the house, for example, whenever it comes to traditionally women-led tasks like cooking or cleaning or taking care of the children. It's challenging that bias and be like, okay, maybe I can also help in this, or maybe we can find a way that it works for the household in general. But I think all of this only starts with the first step, which is acknowledging that we still have a lot of things and challenges to tackle as humanity in terms of advancing inequality, and educate ourselves. I think that's the best we can do.
Thank you so much, Romulo. And we have another question, and I would like to ask this to Silvia. How do you handle the criticism from men when you give a preference to women? When we preference women, we often get a lot of cultural pushback from men community members. Do you have a perspective?
Okay, I have to say, I don't think I experienced that. I did experience a male colleague actually, which shall remain unnamed, who felt that he was going through a sort of list of candidates as a sort of ticking exercise rather than something that he should do to try and improve the situation. So I haven't received any direct criticism. Maybe I've been criticized, behind my back. Who knows? But the way, if anyone is on the receiving end of this, well, it's a correction. I'm going to tell you something a little bit personal. So I have a son who's 13, so a new teenager, and he's experiencing this because, of course, at school they talk about gender equality, they talk about gender more broadly. So there is a bit of confusion, but there is also a little bit, a fresh mind perspective, and he sometimes feels like, oh, but girls are being put at an advantage because it's not my fault that they were not treated nicely before. So there is all of this from an innocent mind, but it is something to bear in mind, because whether a child is perfectly fine to think this, an older person maybe shouldn't really feel in a position where this is a valid argument to bring to the table, because of course we're trying to address something that wasn't quite right before. And to be honest, I don't feel we even need to look into the economic repercussions of an unbalanced society. It's just not the right thing to do as humanity, right? Because we do want to be better, to do a better job and to be fair. And so that's something that I know some people, particularly Sims from older generations, may bring to the table. The answer is that simply is, we're trying to be better as human beings, and that if there may be some overcorrections, perhaps that could be the case, but we're all trying to adjust to find our way. And this is simply how things need to go, because clearly the previous situation wasn't right. for a variety of reasons, including then we can go back to the economic and financial stuff, because there are plenty of studies that, although they don't quite prove causation, although there is one study actually proves causation, it's a really geeky and niche study, but a study that proves that when there are more women in senior management positions in banks, banks suffer less fines. So that's a really interesting study, and I can share it with you, anyone interested in that specific niche. But there are plenty of others who show correlation between a more diverse workforce and better financial results, right? So, I mean, look at the figures. This is just the way that society is moving, thank goodness, because we're trying to improve. I think it's just a matter of how to improve. It's also a matter of showing more women in leadership positions, showing a more diverse. So it's not just gender, right? So it's showing a more diverse way of leading, like visually showing it, or voices, right? So podcasts, different media through which you can bring those voices and those images to people that may be stuck perhaps in a previous sort of social construct. I think that really helps, and it doesn't need to come only from schools or from banks or from companies. It can come from the creative spaces. It can come from pop culture. So the more that you see the role, there is a different kind of way of looking at women, more respectful. I think that's going to then continue to trickle down in younger generations, and then that will be the best and greatest push for the rest of the older generations and the rest of society to really change.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thanks, I think, for doing something that I'm a fan of. But when we talk about diversity and inclusion generally, I think of course, it's really important that we talk about cases, theories, but bringing back to the numbers, bringing it back to the business case and the business outputs is really what sometimes wins in a CEO room or in any conversation and in any panel. I think it's really important that we are bringing the numbers a bit more up when we're talking about the diversity and inclusion. And of course, as you were saying, look at the numbers and you'll see the advantages. And I think this is a really powerful point maybe to use when we get challenged, just to answer to the question, when we get challenged, when we prefer women in certain roles, is just because, there are some track of success that is not a preference of women, is not a gender-based bias, but is skills, and of course is based on proof of success record. So I think this is a really, really important point. And I have a question for you, Astrid, as well, that we got from Bolorma, but I think is bringing a very interesting point, that it goes back to the digital gap that you were mentioning at the beginning of the talk. We talk about the fintech, but the problem is related to digital literacy. And most of micro entities and women entrepreneurs do not have smartphones or free data to use on their mobile applications. So how have you seen, or like examples, how to overcome the digital gap for women that will, of course, prevent from any fintech innovation?
Yes, thank you. I'll tackle that. I just wanted to add a point on the other question that was before. The World Economic Forum just analyzed that after COVID, if we still go at this pace for gender equality, we have 136 years until we are gender equal. It was 110 before COVID. So basically, if someone asks us, why are you focusing a bit more on women than men? Because the gap is still massive. So that's why we still have a long way to go to try and bridge this gap. In terms of the digital literacy, it's a very important problem, especially in a lot of the areas where World Food Program is working, because also of sometimes it's people not having access to smartphone, which is the case in many of the contexts we operate, but it's also sometimes of the infrastructure not being there. So you might be very far remote and there is just no signal. What is amazing is that fintech and startups have tried and developed apps that are either usable with the very small phones that are not smartphone. So you can still have access to mobile money using phones that are not smartphone, which is great. You don't have, of course, all the options, but that's amazing. And in that case, you might have a higher proportion of women who have access to this type of funds. Or there are also other projects where in some areas you can help for the investment of setting up a tower, for instance. For instance, in Bedi Bedi refugee camp in Uganda, there was investment from the humanitarian community to help the local operators to set up a tower to see if it was worth in terms of money revenue for the financial service provider. And after 1 year of usage, then they saw it was worth it for them to operate the tower. So sometimes a private-public partnership is needed to trigger the interest of the private sector to explore how they can look at this segment of clients. But what is important is to also look at the role of the young generation. I think it's more a generational gap. When I was, for instance, in Jordan recently, it was less a difference between men and women in terms of how to operate mobile phone and smartphones. It was a different from generation. And the role of the young, we can really have younger people trying to explain or support the older generation on how to operate their apps. So you have champions in community that can be referent for the community, train them on how to do that in the local language, using the cultural appropriate examples. And that's where the young people play a big role. And we are also trying to work with the 16 to 18 years old. They usually don't have access to accounts because legislation allow you to have a mobile money account or bank account at 18. But if you prepare them before, then they come at 18 and they manage to have their own account and then start their transaction history from a younger age. And I mean, the World Bank published this report, super interesting, explaining the higher the access of women to bank accounts, the higher the percentage of women entrepreneurs. So there is a direct correlation between the opportunity given and the role of women as economic actor, and we really need to support that.
Thank you very much, Astrid. I think this is a really amazing point that we are raising here, and I think it's really it's super to see on the chat some people that are kind of offering their ideas and their solutions to some of the questions the audience is posing. So, for example, we have FJ that has been talking about offering a device that shares a free Wi-Fi for a community, and I think this is saying it might be one solution to this issue. Please keep it coming. If you have any solutions to the questions, this is a place, this is a platform for you to share. One last question for you, Romolo, because we have just 4 minutes left before the end of this panel. And the question that we had here, I think it's about blockchain. So could blockchain play a role in financial inclusion? Do you have an example that you have seen acting in this space? Or
it's
if not,
good question.
Panel.
Sorry?
If not, I'll definitely open it to Sylvia and Astrid, of course.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of an example if you have seen any, but if also Sylvia or Astrid, if you have seen any, please do share.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I've seen.
Sorry, go, Sylvia.
No, sorry. I was just about to say I'm not sure I've seen examples in which blockchain has helped necessarily. Obviously, it's an interesting technology. It's all the information is there. You can manipulate it. So it's great. I'm not sure I've seen anything that would help in a sense of financial inclusion, or even when it comes to gender. But maybe Astrid has.
Yes, WFP has a project called Building Blocks. If I remember well, that's in Lebanon. I need to check, sorry. But the idea was to use blockchain to actually distribute cash entitlements to women and men when there was no financial service provider that was available in the areas where we were operating. There were some pros and cons on that. the idea would be if we can use blockchain, but in an open loop system, because this is then how the transaction history for men and women could be useful for then the local financial service provider, because the whole idea is that women and men don't depend on humanitarian actors for their financial life, but definitely they are integrated in the society and become real clients from financial service provider. So we really believe in the blockchain as a technology for that, but also for IDs. That's also a very interesting areas that will help maybe more women getting IDs.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, and I think it's very something around as well. As Dimitrios here from London is mentioning, blockchain could solve a grassroots financial literacy accreditations issue. And I think it might be something to add to definitely that. And again, I see so many other innovations coming through about in DRC from Nicole, and please keep it coming. And in terms of like a mobile application, which offer the easier, fastest, and most convenient way to make mobile money transactions in Congo. So I think it's really important that we are seeing and we are gathering here so many like-minded people that are really trying with their entrepreneurial efforts to push the innovations up on the market. So there are UNICEF just shared the blockchain financial inclusion link and paper here. So please have a look. Thanks to John Mark for doing that. So I just want to thank, of course, this panel, because we have been spending the last hour together really going through so many different angles and trying to touch such a complex SDG, but the topic, as we know, and I think it's the key point here is that it's meaningful for any country, any market, but above all for any genres. And it's a matter and a question we should ask ourselves every single day in terms of like our actions, what we are doing with our work to maybe, you know, underline and put a spotlight, thanks to our network and our roles and positions and of course jobs to the topic. And of course, giving opportunity, opening it up, giving accessibility to this kind of platforms as Seedstars and FT are doing with events like this, but generally really pushing the ideas of entrepreneurs and individuals. I think it's our goal as a platform here. So I just really want to thank you guys for being such an incredible panel and joining the conversation, and also, you know, answering so many interesting, but also, you know, a bit difficult questions that we received from the audience. So thank you very much to all of you. And thanks for joining.